It's one of the quietest mysteries in our deep past. How is it that a species without language, as we know it, without art, without grand monuments, still managed to leave footprints across 3 continents, cross oceans, tame fire, and set the very blueprint for being human? How come a species that sounds so rudimentary actually managed to survive for almost as long as Homo habilis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthal, and Homo sapiens combined? Long before we dreamt under starlight, long before we painted our fears and hopes on the walls of caves, another kind of human had already rewritten the rules of survival and pushed the boundaries of the known world way farther than just its African cradle. And yet, their story almost slipped away, like footprints lost to wind and time. Who were they? And how did they shape a future they would never live to see? Today, we follow the faint echoes of Homo erectus, the humans who did everything first. Origins, the rise of Homo erectus. Around 2 million years ago, Africa was not the continent we know today. It was a land in flux, a slow-motion collision of ecosystems and climate. The ancient tropical forests that had once blanketed much of the landscape were shrinking, retreating toward the heart of the continent. In their place, spread open savannas, golden and dry, broken only by thorny trees and wandering rivers that shifted with the rains. The climate itself was growing more unpredictable. Wet seasons came and went with little warning. Droughts lingered longer. Waterholes vanished. Herds of antelope and elephants chased fading grasslands across endless distances. It was not a world built for certainty. It was a world built for movement. And in this world, the old ways of life. Clinging to the trees, gathering close to forest edges, began to fail. By this time, Australopithecus afarensis was already gone, fading from the fossil record nearly 1 million years earlier. Australopithecus africanus was in decline, unable to adjust to the opening plains. Even Homo habilis, the first hesitant toolmaker, still depended on forests to survive. Forests that were vanishing from beneath his feet. In a landscape that demanded speed, stamina, and adaptation, clever hands alone were no longer enough. Something new had to emerge. The fossils tell us when the change began. In South Africa, at a site called Dromolen, researchers uncovered the partial skull of a young hominin, known as DNH 143, dated to about 2.04 million years ago. Meanwhile, along the shores of an ancient lake in northern Kenya, at a place now called Kubifora, other remains appeared, just slightly younger. Further west, in the layers of Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, new bones surfaced. Hominins taller, leaner, with stronger legs and larger brains than anything before. Almost at once, this new species seemed to rise across the continent. And then, astonishingly, they began to leave it. Not long after their first appearance in Africa, traces of them show up far to the north, in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains, at a place called Dmanisi in modern-day Georgia. By around 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus had already made it there, and within a few 100,000 years more, their bones would surface in distant Java, an island separated from mainland Asia, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. This was not slow drift. This was purposeful movement, a human species that, faced with change, didn't retreat. They moved, they explored, they adapted. Where the forests fell, they crossed the savannas. Where rivers dried, they followed the clouds. Where prey fled across the heat of the day, they learned to outlast them under a burning sun. They were not specialists tied to one habitat. They were generalists, armed with the most dangerous weapon evolution had yet forged: flexibility. Homo erectus wasn't just another hominin, fighting to hold on to a dying world. They were the beginning of something new. A species that didn't fear change. A species that chased it. Anatomy of a survivor. At first glance, they looked almost human, but not quite. Homo erectus was something new. Something different from everything that had come before. Their bodies weren't built for climbing trees or darting through the undergrowth. They were built for one thing: movement. They stood taller than any hominin before them, with some individuals reaching nearly 6 feet. Their frames were lean, their muscles roped tight over narrow hips and long, powerful legs. Their arms were shorter than their legs, a clear sign that climbing had become secondary. And their feet. Their feet told the real story. The fossilized footprints left behind at places like Illiret, Kenya, around 1.5 million years ago, show something remarkable. Arches, aligned big toes, short toes designed for forward propulsion. Feet made not for grasping branches, but for striding across open ground. Where earlier hominins still balanced between the trees and the earth, Homo erectus had made their choice. They had fully committed to life on two legs. Not just walking, running. Their entire anatomy was optimized for endurance. They developed a spring-like Achilles tendon, able to store and release energy with each step. Their relatively thin, elongated body minimized heat retention, while a modern-like network of sweat glands kept them cool under the brutal equatorial sun. Their shoulders, freed from the demands of climbing, could now rotate with ease, perfect for throwing, for hurling a stone or a spear at fleeing prey. They weren't sprinters. They were persistence hunters, chasing animals across endless savanna, hour after hour, until their prey collapsed from heat exhaustion. In a world where bursts of speed could win a chase, but endurance could win a life, Homo erectus chose the long game. They were the first true long-distance runners. Inside their skulls, another kind of evolution was unfolding. The early populations carried brains between 600 and 800 cubic centimeters, larger than Homo habilis. Later groups, especially those that reached East Asia, edged closer to 1,000 or even 1,100 cubic centimeters, pushing against the lower border of human intelligence. But it wasn't just about size. It was about shape. The frontal lobes, the regions tied to planning, decision-making, perhaps even rudimentary social bonds, were expanding. Not as developed as ours, no, but no longer dominated purely by instinct and reaction. For the first time, a human brain was beginning to think ahead. To imagine tomorrow. Their faces, though, still carried the echoes of a deeper past. Heavy brow ridges jutted over their eyes like permanent stone shelves. Their foreheads sloped back sharply, and their skulls stretched long and low. The bones themselves were thick, built for durability, not delicacy. And where modern humans have a soft, protruding chin, Homo erectus had none. Their jaws ending bluntly, their mouths set for chewing tough, raw foods. And yet, there were hints of something familiar. Their teeth had shrunk, becoming smaller and more human-like. Their noses projected forward, better suited for breathing dry air during long pursuits. Their cheeks flattened. If you stood on the edge of a dried riverbed and saw one of them moving across the plain at sunset, silhouetted against the dying light, fire in their hand and the hunt in their eyes, you might hesitate. For just a heartbeat, you might wonder, is that one of us, or something older, something harder, something still learning what it meant to be human? Fire, tools, and the first technologies. Around 1.7 million years ago, something changed in the dust of East Africa. At Kokisale, along the edge of an ancient river, archaeologists uncovered a handful of stones, not shattered by accident, not crudely bashed apart, but shaped, planned. They weren't the first tools ever made. For hundreds of thousands of years before, early humans had used what we now call the Oldowan toolkit. Simple flakes struck from larger rocks, sharp enough for a few quick cuts before being discarded. Useful but disposable, a tool for the moment and nothing more. But at Kokisale, something else had taken shape. The stones there had been flaked on both sides, bifacially, with edges carefully worked to a purposeful symmetry. They weren't just sharp, they were standardized. Each blow wasn't random, it was part of a plan held in the mind before the first strike was ever made. This was the dawn of the Acheulean tradition. The Acheulean wasn't just a prettier way of breaking stone, it was a revolution, in thought and in survival. To make an Oldowan flake, you needed only impulse. To make an Acheulean hand axe, you needed imagination, the ability to picture a finished tool hidden within the raw stone, and the discipline to bring it out, flake by careful flake. It hinted at something astonishing of foresight, planning, sequencing. The mental architecture needed not just to react to the world, but to shape it in advance. And practically, Acheulean tools changed everything. Oldowan flakes dulled quickly. They shattered, snapped, demanded constant replacement. Acheulean hand axes could be sharpened and reused over and over again. Their thicker, more robust edges made them tougher against hard bones and heavy work. One hand axe could skin an antelope, butcher it to the bone, dig for roots, slice down saplings, even defend against predators. It was, for its time, a portable survival kit. Strong, efficient, reliable. And in a world where energy meant life, this mattered. With sharper tools, Homo erectus could strip more meat from carcasses, crack thick bones to reach the fatty marrow inside, dig for buried plants, too tough for other species to reach. They could access food sources that would have been off-limits to their ancestors. More energy meant more survival. More survival meant more movement. And while their hands shaped stone, their minds were beginning to tame an even older force: fire. By around 1 million years ago, deep inside the darkness of Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, the blackened bones and ash layers tell a different kind of story. Here, in the dirt pressed by 1 million years of passing seasons, is evidence that Homo erectus didn't just find fire. They kept it. Maybe they couldn't yet spark flame from scratch. But when lightning struck dry grass, or embers smoldered after a brush fire, they could capture it, feed it, protect it. And with fire, the nights transformed. Meat, once tough and sinewy, softened over the flames, making more calories available for the growing brain and less needed for powerful jaw muscles. Roots and tubers, once toxic, turned edible. Predators shrank back from the light, and the cold fear of the night gave way to warmth, to security. Around the fire, days could stretch longer into the night. Around the fire, knowledge could pass more easily between generations. Around the fire, something like culture, something lasting, could begin to flicker. Fire really changed the whole game of survival, as it gave Erectus more food sources to take from, more security against predators, and more time to spend by the fire to exchange ideas and communicate. Homo erectus didn't invent survival. It had been there since the dawn of life. But they really were the first to turn it into a strategy. One flake, one flame, one long journey at a time. Thus, Erectus reclaimed very precious resources, time and energy. These would be used to undertake the greatest journey any hominin would ever take in humanity's history. Erectus left the comfort of his close environment and headed to the unknown. They stepped out of the forest's shadows and began to shape the world itself. The Great Migration, crossing a world. And so they moved. At first, it was north. Around 1.85 million years ago, in what is now Dmanisi, Georgia, the bones of Homo erectus appear, Maudesat, small-bodied, sharp-eyed, tools clutched in hand, standing on the threshold of a new world. They followed herds of antelope and elephants across widening savannas. They crossed rivers that carved deep valleys into the land. They threaded through forests and high plateaus, pushing beyond the familiar with each passing generation. And they didn't stop. By 1.6 million years ago, they had reached northern China, leaving their mark in places like Gongwangling and Lantian. By at least 1.5 million years ago, they were established across Southeast Asia, from the ancient lowlands of Sangiran to the river valleys of Java. They had crossed whole continents. They had climbed mountain ranges, skirted deserts, forded rivers swollen by the rains. And even more unbelievable for a species we thought this primitive before, they sailed across seas. The fossils found on Java tell a story stranger than migration alone. Even during the ice ages, when sea levels fell by hundreds of meters, deep channels like the Makassar Strait and the Lombok Strait kept Java and the other islands isolated from mainland Asia, meaning that no simple land bridge connected them, ever. No footpath waded across the tides. It was supposedly a world out of reach for them, and yet Homo erectus made it. Whether clinging to storm-driven debris, or lashing together makeshift rafts of driftwood and vines, or simply pushing out into the unknown without knowing if they could ever return, they crossed. This was no accident, and later, evidence only deepens the mystery. On the island of Flores, farther east, another population, clearly descendants from Homo erectus, would appear by around 100,000 years ago, long after sea levels had dropped to their lowest. Even then, crossing to Flores required navigating, at least 19 kilometers of open water. They managed to sail in numbers significant enough for a population to establish itself, free of inbreeding, and evolve there for tens of thousands of years. Something inside them, instinct, curiosity, desperation, had already broken one of evolution's oldest barriers. They were no longer creatures confined by the shape of the land. They had become sailors of rivers and seas, even if their vessels were rough and their voyages blind. They were the first humans to chase a horizon they could not see beyond, and go anyway. For much of the 20th century, Dmanisi and Sangran marked the known boundaries of humanity's first steps beyond Africa. But the deeper we dig, the more ancient the story becomes. In the red soils of Shangqian, China, researchers uncovered stone tools buried in layers dated to about 2.1 million years ago, pushing the human presence in Asia back hundreds of thousands of years earlier than once believed. At Atirampakam in India, shaped tools suggest ancient habitation between 1.5 and 1.7 million years ago. Across Arabia's shifting deserts, sites like Al-Wusta hint that humans may have crossed and recrossed the continent countless times, riding the pulses of ancient wet periods. Even on the muddy shores of England, at Happisburgh, the faint tracks of human feet over 800,000 years ago tell us that the march outward did not end at Asia's edge. The old image of a single heroic migration has faded. What remains is something grander and harder to see clearly, a long, messy scattering, generation by generation, wave after wave, an entire species learning, one painful step at a time, how to master a world too vast to ever fully know. They weren't driven by conquest. They weren't guided by maps or grand designs. They moved because movement was survival, because water needed crossing, because the horizon was always just out of reach. The same restless impulse that would one day drive caravans across deserts, ships across oceans, and rockets into empty sky had already taken root. Curiosity, hunger, and hope, essentially, long before we ever sang songs of discovery and myths of faraway lands, Homo erectus had lived them, unbeknownst to us. And with every fire they carried into the unknown, with every river crossed and every horizon chased, they wove the first great human journey. The first migration had begun. But no journey, no matter how far, could protect against time itself. Even as Homo erectus conquered continents, the clock was already ticking. Genetics, our shared shadows. Homo erectus may not have left us a clear genetic signature. At least none that we have yet recovered. Their fossils, scattered across Africa and Eurasia, are too old, too weathered by heat and time for DNA to survive. The molecules unraveled long ago, leaving only stone and bone behind. And yet, in a deeper sense, their genetic legacy survives. Because what we carry today, in our bodies, in our muscles, in the wiring of our brains, was built on the foundations they laid. We know that the genes driving modern human bipedalism, genes like RUNX2, which shapes limb proportions and skeletal structure, had already shaped Homo erectus. Their skeletons show a commitment to full-time terrestrial locomotion. Long legs, short arms, arched feet, forward-facing toes. Traits tuned for endurance running across open landscapes. We know that thermoregulation, another critical survival advantage, was likely in place. Genetic adaptations like early forms of EDR, which influence sweat gland density and skin characteristics, would have been under selection pressures in the hot, open savannas where Homo erectus thrived. Their brains, too, were changing. Although we lack direct genetic samples, fossil evidence of expanded brain cases and the development of areas like Broca's region suggests that the evolutionary groundwork for modern cognition was being laid. Genes such as ASPM and MCPH1, tied to brain growth and organization, likely saw selection pressures during this era, setting the stage for the later cognitive leaps of Homo sapiens. Energy management also played a role. The metabolic demands of a large brain and an active mobile body would have driven genetic changes linked to mitochondrial function and endurance capacity. Even without sequencing their DNA, we can infer their biological impact, their anatomy, their endurance strategies, their capacity for planning and movement. All left echoes in the species that followed. We know that Homo heidelbergensis, likely a descendant of Erectus, carried those same adaptations into colder, harsher environments. And from Heidelbergensis came the Neanderthals and Denisovans, who in turn contributed fragments of their genomes to modern Homo sapiens. Through morphology, through behavior, and through survival strategies passed across vast spans of time, Homo erectus shaped the evolutionary trajectory that led to us. When we run long distances, when we build shelters, when we organize into cooperative groups, we are continuing behavioral patterns that first emerged over 1 million years ago. Many of the fundamental adaptations that define Homo sapiens, our endurance-based body plan, our thermoregulation system, our enlarged and reorganized brains, can be traced back to Homo erectus. Even without direct DNA evidence, their impact is clear. Through the morphology of later species like Homo heidelbergensis, through the survival strategies inherited and refined over generations, Homo erectus established a blueprint that shaped the course of human evolution. Their legacy is not a matter of myth. It is a matter of biological continuity. They did not vanish. They laid the foundations for what came next. A legacy in every step. Homo erectus lasted for nearly 2 million years. Far longer than any other human species before or since. Their success cannot be explained by constant innovation, nor by rapid cultural revolutions. Compared to later Homo species, their toolkits evolved very slowly, but they just got 2 massive technology leaps, fire and Acheulean tools. These 2 alone, were plenty enough to take Erectus places. All the slight innovations couldn't bring the other hominins to. They did not build cathedrals, nor did they paint the walls of caves. Just simple shelters. They left no evidence of complex symbolic behavior, unlike other hominids, such as Homo naledi or later hominins. What they achieved was something rarer in evolutionary history. Stability. Over their span, Homo erectus endured some of the most volatile environmental changes the planet has seen. They survived through glacial and interglacial cycles that reshaped continents, through volcanic winters that blanketed ecosystems in ash, cutting sunlight for years at a time, through droughts that emptied river systems and transformed lush grasslands and even tropical jungles into arid deserts. Every climatic shockwave culled species from the earth, but Homo erectus adapted, not by radically reinventing themselves, but by maintaining flexibility at their core. Their endurance came from 3 primary evolutionary strategies. First, ecological generalism. Unlike species that specialized in narrow niches, feeding only on certain plants or requiring specific habitats, Homo erectus maintained a broad, opportunistic diet. Isotopic analyses of their teeth suggest they consumed a wide range of foods, from meat and marrow to tubers and wild fruits, depending on availability. Their Acheulean tools allowed them to process both tough plants and large animal carcasses with efficiency, giving them access to high-calorie resources even when conditions shifted. Second, geographic mobility. Their long-distance body plan, tall, narrow bodies with efficient heat regulation, enabled them to exploit a vast range of habitats, from the equatorial savannas of Africa to the temperate woodlands of Eurasia. When local ecosystems collapsed, they moved. When prey shifted routes, they followed. Homo erectus was not bound to a single environment. Their fossils stretch across more territory than any hominin before Homo sapiens, covering millions of square kilometers. Third, low technological turnover. Rather than constant innovation, Homo erectus relied on highly effective, long-lasting technological strategies. The Acheulean toolkit remained fundamentally unchanged for over 1 million years, a testament to its efficiency. Standardized, reliable, multifunctional tools reduced their dependency on specialized techniques that could fail under new conditions. This combination, generalism, mobility, and technological consistency, created a species resilient to disruption, a species that could persist across environmental chaos that erased many of their contemporaries. It was not superior intelligence that secured their place. It was adaptability. It was persistence. When the world changed, Homo erectus did not resist. They moved, they adjusted, they endured, and in doing so, they became the longest surviving member of the human family. The first true global wanderers, the true definition of jack of all trades, master of none. But no journey, no matter how far, could protect against time itself. Even as Homo erectus conquered continents, the clock was already ticking. 7. The long decline. Why Homo erectus eventually disappeared. For nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus had endured everything the world could throw at them. But even the most successful survival strategies have limits. Their disappearance was not sudden. It was not the result of a single catastrophe. It was a slow, uneven process, shaped by forces that Homo erectus could neither foresee nor control. Over time, the environments they had mastered continued to shift beneath their feet. From around 800,000 years ago, the Earth's climate entered a period of increasing instability. Glacial cycles became sharper, swinging more rapidly between deep freezes and intense warming. Rainfall patterns shifted, river systems collapsed, habitats fragmented into isolated pockets, severing once connected populations from each other. Small, isolated groups are more vulnerable to extinction. With fewer individuals, genetic diversity shrinks. Inbreeding rises. Local disasters, droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions can wipe out entire lineages with no chance of recolonization. The vast, connected world that Homo erectus once navigated was breaking into smaller, harsher fragments. At the same time, new forms of humans were beginning to emerge. In Africa, Homo heidelbergensis appeared around 700,000 years ago. Taller, heavier, with larger brains approaching modern human proportions. In Europe, early Neanderthals adapted to colder climates with broader bodies and advanced hunting tools. Later, Homo sapiens would follow, bringing faster technological innovation and higher social complexity. These newer Homo species were not simply stronger or smarter in every way, but they were often better adapted to local environments and more flexible in their tool use, social structures, and hunting strategies. In some regions, Homo erectus may have been pushed aside by competition. In others, they may have simply faded, unable to adapt quickly enough to the increasingly severe challenges of their changing world. Erectus didn't just vanish. It clung onto dear life for a long time. Way longer than anyone in the scientific community ever expected. Their last known refuges lie far from where their story began. On the island of Java, fossils from Ngandong suggest that small populations of Homo erectus persisted until as recently as 108,000 years ago, long after they had vanished elsewhere. Trapped by rising seas, cut off from migration routes, they lingered in isolation until time itself caught up with them. No dramatic extinction event marks their end. No final battle, no collapse. They simply receded as the world around them changed faster than they could. Their disappearance was not a failure. It was the inevitable outcome of an evolutionary reality. Adaptation buys time, but not immortality. In the end, even the most resilient species fall to the relentless forces of change. But what Homo erectus achieved, endurance across continents, survival across millennia, mastery of tools and fire, laid the foundations for everything that came after. Their story did not end with their bones. It carried forward in every human who would one day follow their footsteps. Conclusion: the blueprint they left behind. Homo erectus did not leave behind towering monuments, written records, or grand myths. They left something simpler, and in evolutionary terms, a lot more rare. They established the blueprint for survival as a human. A body built for distance and endurance. A mind capable of planning beyond the present. A mastery of tools and fire that expanded the possibilities of life itself. They survived longer than any human species before or since. Not because they outsmarted the world, but because they adapted to it, again and again, without breaking. Their innovations, simple, practical, fundamental, shaped the evolutionary path that led to Homo heidelbergensis, to Neanderthals, to Denisovans, and finally, to Homo sapiens. When we look at the shape of our hands, the structure of our feet, the way we organize, explore, and endure, we are not looking forward. We are looking backward into a lineage that stretches 2 million years deep. Homo erectus did not vanish. They evolved, and their legacy is still moving, still adapting, still enduring in us, because the story of humanity isn't just about beginnings. It's about connections. It's about carrying something forward, something bigger than ourselves. If this journey through deep time sparked something in you, a question, a curiosity, maybe even a sense of wonder, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more stories from the roots of who we are. Like the video if it helped reframe how you see our species. Share it with someone who still looks at the horizon and wonders what's beyond. Your curiosity, your voice, your clicks. They help these ancient stories echo a little farther. Thanks for walking this path with us. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes.